All right, in the last lesson, we finished up step 1. Now we are on to step 2, setting up a customer context. Okay, so we're just going to briefly read through this documentation. It says, in addition to setting up your Stripe payment context delegate, you'll also need to initialize a Stripe customer context. And just to refresh, what that does is the Stripe customer context retrieves and updates a Stripe customer using an ephemeral key, which is what we've been working with the past couple of lessons, retrieving that, which is a short-lived API key scoped to a specific customer object. Okay, so the way to initialize that customer context is simple right here. Let customer context equal Stripe customer context, and we initialize it with a key provider. And that key provider is that Stripe API class that we just created in the last lesson. And this will automatically prefetch its customer once its key provider has been set. If you'd like to take advantage of preloading your customer's information, you should initialize your Stripe customer context instance earlier before your user enters your payment flow. You can do that if you want. We're just going to initialize it right when we enter the checkout view controller. And then once we've set up our customer context, we use it to initialize the Stripe payment context. And be sure to set your payment context delegate and host view controller properties. You should also set the payment context payment amount property, which will be displayed to your user in the Apple Pay dialog. You can change this later if the amount of the user's purchase changes. And we initialize the payment context like so with the customer context. We're going to be adding a little bit more, so this constructor is going to be a little bit different, but we set the delegate and the host view controller and the payment amount as well. All right, so let's get to that. We're going to be back here in Xcode. I'm going to save our Stripe API. One thing that I missed here is that we need to say let Stripe API equal underscore Stripe API, just like that. All right, save that, and we are going to be working in our checkout view controller. And we are going to create a function here called func setup Stripe config. And what we are going to need is we're going to need that customer context, right? So I'm going to say let customer context equal STP. Oh, we're going to need to import Stripe here. Import Stripe. There we go. So STP customer context. All right, and we've already talked several times about what it does. So we initialize it with a key provider. And you can see here that it says STP ephemeral key provider. This is the protocol that whatever class we pass here needs to conform to, which our Stripe API definitely does. See? All right, so we can pass in Stripe API, just like that. And that will create our customer context. And when we create this customer context, what it's going to do is it's going to invoke the cloud function, generate an ephemeral key, pass it back, and then this customer context class will go ahead and prefetch the Stripe customer's information from its Stripe object, getting its saved credit card information if there is any shipping information that's saved, all of that information. All right, so we have our customer context. The next thing to do is create our Stripe payment context. But I said that we're going to be setting up a couple of additional things with our payment context using the Stripe payment context configuration. So we're going to initialize a config variable here, and this is of type STP payment configuration. All right, and this just represents all the options you can set or change around a payment. Okay, and this is going to be .shared. And we are going to set config .create card sources. So this is just a few of the things that we're going to change about our Stripe payment context's configuration. And so create card sources, what this does is if the value of this property is true, when our user adds a card in our UI, so when we click on manage payments and we input some card information, then a card source will be created and added to our Stripe customer. The default value for this is false. I'm not sure why. But we want this to be true so that whenever our user enters in their card information, that it gets saved to their Stripe user object. Okay, so I'm going to say create card sources is equal to true. Another thing we're going to change is say config.required billing address fields. So these are the billing address fields the user must fill out when prompted for their payment details. And we're actually just going to say equal.none, okay? And some of your options are .full, and so this is the full billing address, you know, your name, postal address, etc. You can do just the name, you can do none, you can do just the zip. Like I said, we're just going to do none. We're just going to have just the credit card number and CCV. Okay. Next up, we are going to modify our shipping address fields. So I'm going to say required shipping address fields. So these are the required shipping address fields the user must fill out when prompted for their shipping info. And we are going to say, this is an array. So we're going to say dot, and you can see the different options: email address, name, phone number, postal address. We're just going to go with the full physical address. If you want, you can add the phone number or email address, but we're just going to go with just the postal address. Very good. So now we have our config set up. We have our customer context. Now we can create our payment context. Our payment context, though, we're going to need to access it from multiple locations in our checkout view controller. So let's create a class, a variable for that. So I'm going to say variables, and I'm going to say var payment context is of type stp payment context, and implicitly unwrap that. And then down here, back in our setup Stripe config, we're going to initialize it by saying payment context is equal to stp payment context, and initialize it with this guy right here. We want this one with the customer context, configuration, and theme options. Okay, our customer context is the customer context that we just initialized. Our configuration is config, and the theme, we're going to say dot default. Okay, so this is the default theme used by all Stripe UI. Very good. So now we have our payment context initialized, and what we can do is here we are going to set the payment context payment amount. All right, so I'm going to say payment context dot payment amount is equal to, and this is going to be equal to the Stripe cart dot total. Okay, so we set this payment amount here in setup Stripe config, which we are calling from view did load setup Stripe config. However, we have the ability to remove items from our shopping cart in the checkout view controller. So we are going to need to update our payment context payment amount anytime that happens. So I'm just going to copy this line, and then down here in our remove item method, I'm going to paste that right here so that when we remove an item, Stripe cart, it updates its amount, but we need to also update the payment context's payment amount. Okay, very good. And then finally, we need to set the delegate and host view controller. So I'm going to say payment context dot delegate is equal to self, and payment context dot host view controller is equal to self. Very good. All right, so now if we ran this, we wouldn't see anything really happening. Oh, and one thing that we need to do is we need to conform to the Stripe payment context delegate. So I'm going to create an extension right here, and I'm going to say extension for the checkout view controller, and we are going to conform to the Stripe payment context delegate. Stripe payment context delegate. Here we go. So we implement this to get notified when a payment context changes, finishes, encounters errors, etc. In practice, if your app has a checkout screen view controller, this is a good candidate to implement this protocol. All right, so we're going to conform to that, and we're going to get some errors here for some stubs that we need to add. So I'm going to say fix, And we're going to leave these alone for this lesson. We're going to be working on these in the next lesson. Looks like we have one more. There we go. All right, so we have these 4 methods that we're going to be working with in the next lesson. But for now, I'm just going to remove these code placeholders. Very good. And let's build that and make sure everything's working. All right, so we have a successful build. And so like I was saying, if we ran this right now, we wouldn't see anything really change. We've initialized our customer context and our payment context, but we're not doing anything with those yet. So let me show you how easy it is to work with these standard Stripe UI components. We've initialized our payment context and our customer context. Now look at what we can do. Here in our payment method clicked, so let me run this. Let me run this here so we can take a look. All right, so I'm going to add some items to our cart. Okay, so when we click on payment methods, select method right here. All we need to do to present our credit card UI is say payment context dot push payment methods view controller. And this is going to create, configure, and appropriately push a Stripe payment methods view controller onto the navigation stack. Okay, so check this out. I'm gonna run this again. I'm going to add a couple of items, go to our cart, and then click on select method here, and boom, check that out. We have here the Stripe UI component for adding and managing your payment methods. Very cool. So what we can do here is we can add in credit cards. So while you're in test mode, Stripe has a number of test cards and methods that you can use. Just do a search for Stripe test payments. And you'll see here, testing Stripe. And we can scroll down here and we have a number of test card numbers and tokens. So if you want to try out different brands, I usually just do the 4242 because that's the easiest one to remember. So if we come back to our simulator, we can type in 4242424242424242. And then for the expiration date, all you need to do is do any date in the future. So I'm just going to say 1020. And then for the CVC, all you need to do is any 3 numbers. So I'm going to say 1, 2, 3, then I'm going to say done. All right, so now what has happened is the Stripe customer context, it has gone ahead and saved and updated the customer information for this Stripe customer. Okay, so that is pretty cool. So if we come back to our Stripe dashboard and we go to our customers, and I'm not actually sure which one I'm logged in with, so I'll just pick one of these. But what you'll see is that if you come over here, you'll now have a card here. Okay, so I think this is the one that we just set. And then if we go back to our simulator, let's go ahead and add another card. So I'm going to say add new card. This time let's go with the MasterCard. So it's 5s and then 4s. I'm going to say 5555, 5555, 5555, 4444, 1021, 123. I'm going to say done. And that's going to add it. So if we come back to our payment method, we should now see 2. And you can edit these cards. You can delete them. You can, well, I guess you can only add and delete them. But what I want to show you is now back here in the Stripe payment, or in our Stripe dashboard, if I refresh this, we should now see 2 cards here in our Stripe customer. Very cool. And that's all done automatically for us because of our customer context and our payment context that we've initialized. Very cool. All right, so we have our payment methods, and that's really all you need to do for your user to enter in their payment information and be able to use it. All right, so the next one that we can add is our shipping method. So I'm going to say payment context dot push shipping view controller. And this creates, configures, and appropriately pushes a view controller for collecting shipping address and shipping method information. I'm going to push that shipping view controller, save it, and run this. All right, so let's go ahead and add a couple of items. I guess we don't really need to add these, but if we come here to shipping, we can say select method and check it out. We have right here our shipping address view controller all set up. So we can just put in a name. I'm gonna say Johnny, address. I don't know, I'll say 1 Apple Park Way. And that's in Cupertino, 95014, city Cupertino. There we go. Autofills for you, so that's nice. And then we can say next, and boom, we've entered our shipping address. And if we refresh our Stripe customer object here, we should now see shipping details. Johnny, 1 Apple Parkway, Cupertino. How cool is that? All right, so with just this little bit of code right here, we were able to initialize our customer context, which, just to recap, we initialize with our key provider, which is in fact our Stripe API class, which conforms to this delegate, which implements this method, which we send to our backend function, the Stripe version and customer ID, which goes and contacts Stripe, passes them the customer and Stripe version, and returns the ephemeral key for that Stripe customer, which then returns the key and initializes the customer context. This then prefetches and goes and grabs all of the information for our Stripe customer object here, including the shipping details, the payment methods that are saved, and will update and keep the Stripe customer object up to date right here. And that's all done, built in with the Stripe SDK. So Stripe really makes it easy to work with their payments. All right, so pretty cool stuff here. Hope you guys are enjoying it. In the next lesson, we are going to be working with the Stripe payment context methods here, which handles the rest of the payment logic. All right, so we will be working on that in the next one. I will see you there.